Are you an entrepreneur or ready to become a boss? Welcome to Hawaii Boss, the business podcast made in Hawaii, where you will hear from island movers and shakers on who they are and their impact on our state. And now, step into the office of your host for Hawaii Boss, David Pettijohn.
Aloha, Hawaii Boss podcast crew listening in out there as you do. Each week we come and we go to a different boss's office. We're very fortunate today because we had the chance 1 year ago to also meet with Josh Green in the middle of the pandemic via Zoom. But now, as we're getting back together and the pandemic is moving on, we're able to meet in his office. I want to talk a little bit about the things that are happening for you in your office, Josh, and is that okay, Josh?
Please, always.
I think that's the expectation. You tell everybody, hey, call me Josh. Is there Doc? Is that another one?
Either one would be fine.
Okay.
You know, there's Dad out there, but I think that's going to be weird for us.
Yeah. I won't go there.
That's right.
Yes. Awesome. So, listen, thank you so much for having us. And again, as you sort of summarize your work and your role as Lieutenant Governor, and of course, we really appreciate you giving us the opportunity. We give you this lei here.
Thank you.
You betcha.
I appreciate it. Yeah. And this is your anniversary, so we're going to do you one up.
Oh,
thank you again. What do you guys do?
Appreciate it. Yeah. No, our goal from the beginning, in the pandemic was, just to try and make sure that we were communicating with people. It was so hard during the pandemic, but now that we're getting together and you're sort of at the twilight of your career as Lieutenant Governor, and we want to talk about that a little bit and see what you've done and maybe some of your thoughts and opinions as a citizen of Hawaii and certainly have strong opinions about the future, I imagine. So this question comes from 8-year-old Sebastian Gonzalez from the Kamalani Academy. How important is it to you and your administration and the Hawaii government in general that our islands remain trash and debris free for future generations? We're trying to, Hawaii is such a special place, and how do we keep that?
Yes. Well, let me say thank you, Sebastian, for asking that question. It's critically important. People ask what the biggest issues are all the time, and it's hard to deny that protecting the environment isn't our most important issue.
Sure.
There are issues that we'll talk about, I'm sure, in this podcast, but the environment came before us and it will come after us for generations.
Sure.
We also have to protect the environment, whether it's from global warming or from plastics accumulating in our ocean, which can choke out the life in the ocean and sea, or just the beauty of Hawaii, which is the thing that is most special.
Right.
So everyone should be attentive to environmental protection.
Yeah, and I think it's more of the term I like to use is sort of stewardship.
Yes.
And it seems like good stewards of the land, and so that's great. But there is a lot of work to do in that area, and I think as people pay attention to it and live that and understand that as being part of Hawaii. But there's also a future for young guys like Sebastian who are trying to live. He's 8 years old now, but he's going to come up in the education system of Hawaii, and he probably wants to work and live here when he grows up. What are some university and college, community college systems, of Hawaii doing right now, you think, to really help to build that workforce for the future?
Well, right now we're hoping the university will become our economic machine for the state. A lot of times the best technology, the best innovations come out of the university, and University of Hawaii is a special place. So in 10 years, when Sebastian is looking at colleges or other friends are looking at colleges, I have a 15-year-old and an 11-year-old who will go off to higher education. We will look to our universities to be able to provide either training for some of the disciplines we need, like nurses and teachers.
Yeah, I'm curious about trades too, because it seems like we always have to hire in and bring them from the mainland for these really important, the builders and the fixers. Where are they?
Well, that's one of the greatest parts of our community college system. So the trades thrive there. What I believe is that we should look at education from an early age of age 3 and do early pre-K education all the way to age 20 and give people an opportunity to do at least 2 years of community college, no matter what.
Sure.
Other people may want to do 4-year degrees, but that is a really good way to look at the breadth of core education. And then some people will go do a medical degree or a law degree or a PhD, and others will use the degrees they get up to age 20 to just thrive. So environmental science is going to be a big deal, but so are some of these other things, because we just don't have enough people with skills to work in Hawaii because it's so difficult to afford to live here.
Yeah, that's an ongoing challenge. You mentioned that, the difficulty of living here because of the cost of living, and a lot of people they go get their schooling and they want to come home, and they talk about it, and it's finally they have to sort of mature in their career first before they can come home. So, pathways back or even pathways just to stay seems appropriate.
Yeah, a lot of people have to be into their second or third job before they, as their career grows, before they can afford a down payment on a home. That is one of the biggest challenges we have in Hawaii. Affordability of housing is so out of control that if we don't get a hold of that, you won't have people that do regular jobs, core jobs, good, solid, working class jobs, be able to even begin to afford to live here. So that is a super challenge for us. So when I look at why don't we have enough teachers, it's really because we don't have enough housing.
Right.
When we don't have enough nurses or firefighters or police, it's because a house may cost $1 million. So doing something about that will bring all these other people here. It'll mean that young engineers and young teachers and young everybody can come and be in Hawaii.
Right, but that's a tough nut to crack. That's not. I think everyone's been working on that for a little while. So
yeah, it's going to take some probably aggressive moves to get it done.
Yeah, and speaking of housing, a little bit of a shift. I came from the Big Island, spent 7 years living over on the Big Island, and met some great people and some native Hawaiian folks. And when I was on the Big Island, there was a groundbreaking for the Hawaiian homelands. They're making a development there, and it's great. But there's still, as they reported, 28,000 still a waiting list for some of these Hawaiian folks. What are, that's another one that's sort of a complex issue. What are your thoughts and positions on how do we deal with that?
Well, that's one of our best opportunities because if people have been following the legislature this year, which I know not everyone follows this square building, but this was a banner year for that. So the legislature did something very good. They invested $600 million of the surplus. We recovered from the COVID pandemic very quickly, which was great. So our economy is now roaring forward. And that extra resource, some came from the feds, some came from our tax dollars, meant that we can spend $600 million on those Hawaiian homelands programs. And so the 28,000 people need to come off the list. We have 203,000 acres that are available. Not all are perfect for housing, but plenty are. This is our opportunity to be discriminating in producing housing for our people because there are very few housing projects that allow you to just focus on local people. Department of Hawaiian Homelands is one of them. So I'm excited about that. There was also a $300+ million settlement for people who have been on the list too long and unfairly. Those resources will help those families because they'll have a down payment to buy a home in Department of Hawaiian Homelands.
Sure. So they'll still have that eligibility even though with that reimbursement there. That's great. They're, again, I think they've been waiting for a long time, and I know, for decades that this has been sort of an issue on how we deal with this. So.
Well, let me tell you a story. So my wife's mom was half Hawaiian, okay? She died, her name is Yvonne, she died young from cancer. Jamie, my wife, today's actually her birthday, Jamie was only 25%, and so she got bounced off the list, which is tragic because her family maybe didn't have as much resource and they were eligible just one generation ago. And so this is what's happening to the Hawaiian people. Right. So we have to fix that, and we have to get all of the people off that list to the extent it's possible into housing. So whether we disposition land really rapidly or we use these extra dollars to build out developments, either one will be good.
Sure, and along those same lines, the Native Hawaiian people have concerns with their interaction with Hawaii in relationship to TMT.
Yes.
And I know there's been some adjustments, and maybe there's something going to be signed here soon about the sort of this oversight, the Mauna Kea Stewardship and Oversight Authority.
Yes.
And under new management, I guess we'll call it where the same sort of impasse that we had a couple of years ago, that maybe we can move forward from this. What's your position on it?
I'd love to see us move forward, but it has to be through a respectful conversation. That dialogue has to be there, and it has to be utterly respectful of our Hawaiian community, because we've seen it over and over again. If the dialogue doesn't meet the needs, the cultural and psychological needs of the people who are our host culture, then there will still be an impasse. So what I believe is that by living up to our commitments and promises over the decades, which Hawaiian Homelands is one, and so getting Hawaiian Homelands projects done, getting people housing, being fair, having equity between peoples is probably the key to unlocking some of the projects, perhaps like TMT. So I'm very excited to see people move forward, but it takes that commitment and that series of promises kept.
Sure, and that's, I guess the proof is in the pudding. We'll see as we go forward, if that is something that legislatures are committed to.
Right, and management definitely has to be by the Hawaiian people if we're talking about Mauna Kea. Now, it couldn't be a blend, it can be a hybrid version, but it has to be an honest blend, an honest combined management, and I think that was really the problem. For so long, people just didn't trust that there was proper stewardship of the island in general, with the lands and the mountain.
Transparency was sort of difficult to get in and find out really what was happening.
Right, because ceded lands were being utilized, and there were leases, but the leases were not built to be fair. And so when you have unfair leases, just like anybody, if you're treated unfairly, then you feel like you're not being respected. And if you're not being respected, you can't work with people. So it's a series of those challenges that had to be kind of unraveled.
And a complicated sort of bureaucracy that you have to move through that slows things down, sometimes intentionally. But
yes.
But that's a challenge, and a bright vision for the future sounds, I think, something we all need.
Yes.
You talked about the economy a little bit, and we're roaring back, and that's awesome. Is there a balance, though, with tourism and our ability to maintain and sustain? This is a sort of fundamental backbone of our economy.
Well, there needs to be a new balance, that's for sure. Before the pandemic, we reached a point where people were really overwhelmed by the number of tourists. We were well over 10 million a year. We only have a population of 1.4 million people. That was just too much.
The Maui mayor said, don't come.
Yeah, that was quite extraordinary. And the governor did during the pandemic because we were worried about spread. And as you know, I was very focused on that too. But as we go forward, the idea is to have a better experience for people that has some cultural significance, that they come and want to stay maybe longer, maybe spend more resources, but over a longer period of time.
Sure.
And we get the kind of tourists or visitors that have a commitment to, I guess, also nurturing this state. And I think that you will see us discuss whether it's impact fees because of the heavy footprint on our natural resources when people travel here, for which we should use those resources to preserve our parks and our open spaces and our conservation lands, and maybe even help us with housing and affordability. That's the kind of dialogue you will see, and that will decrease the total number of tourists that come each year, but increase the amount of resource. That's the perfect situation. Whether we can achieve that or not remains to be seen, but I'll tell you this, people really felt kind of pent up, and they need to travel globally. We are already seeing a full economic recovery almost before even the Japanese tourists return. And that's about 30% of our revenue usually from the Japanese travelers. So you can expect a lot of recovery. Let me say this though, as your lieutenant governor, we need the economic recovery because a lot of people went into a pretty deep, dark space when we were in the depths of COVID.
Sure.
They lost their savings, they didn't have resources for their children, their housing might have been unstable, insecure, food sources, all these things. So I need people to have a good couple economic years.
Yeah, the small businesses particularly impacted. If a small restaurant, and when I first arrived here, it was March 28th, and that was the cutoff, and the pandemic started, and there was nothing moving. And I mean, those poor folks were just, what do we do? What do we do? We're so dependent on those type of things. So creating a balance, and what kind of companies do you think would create that balance? And international organizations, mainland organizations, what kind of, I guess, industry and professions you would like to see?
Well, we talk a lot about this in my group. One thing is, as tourism is still considered our main economic machine, right-fitting the kind of tourism that people want now. So we're thinking about health tourism. It could be a couple extra $1 billion that comes to Hawaii because people need health care. And as society ages and people who travel to Hawaii age, it's a really good opportunity to do what we do well, but with extra resources. So that's one thing. Other major investments will probably be green jobs. So energy programs like we've succeeded with before, like solar, like wind, but other innovative energy companies that can come and help us both with our renewables. Our portfolio has to get us to 100% over time, as you know, and also decreasing the amount of money that we send offshore for oil would be a very good thing for the state of Hawaii. We spend billions on our fuel. So I would expect green jobs and energy-savvy industries to come to Hawaii.
Yeah, that's another barrier for folks and businesses. The cost of energy is just huge, and it's a market significant compared to other places.
For sure.
So along those lines, we have to draw on limited resources we have, sometimes federal resources. We got a great new stadium that's coming along. What are your thoughts there, and where do you see maybe similar type of developments happening?
That's going to be a big one, right? So the rail will eventually come to a conclusion. It looks like it may pause after like 18 stops. We'll see what the mayor decides ultimately. What I would say is this: the stadium is going to be a big deal because a vibrant society has some of these opportunities for people, and we have to turn that into housing, and we have to turn that into jobs, and I think it will get built. But there are other big projects that we have to address. We will have to address the TMT eventually. Maybe what we'll do is we will remove the older telescopes, and that will also help break any impasse. But the footprint should be thoughtful. If it's going to happen, it should be, again, considerate. And as to where it is, ultimately, that close to the summit, if that disrupts the cultural sense of self for the Hawaiian community, we'll just have to be understanding.
Sure.
So these are the big things that are coming, but there's a lot of future for Hawaii. There's also been a large number of people that want to move to Hawaii because you have a whole series of industries that allow you to work from afar. And so I think that we're going to get some additional computer tech, computer engineering. Sure. Those kind of things will also end up settling here in Hawaii. And some people in Hawaii will be working abroad or
remotely.
on the mainland,
remotely.
Yeah, but still living here if they can afford housing. So that's the catch-22.
Yeah, and that's I guess the problem, that the knot you have to untie, the several or the clump of knots, I guess, that you have to untie there.
Yes.
Along with that, as we again gain those resources externally and try to use our state resources. Red Hill, water, so I guess you could call it a disaster.
Yes.
And we sort of, fight, but there's this give and take between the federal government and the state. What's your position on how that works?
Well, I saw that coming in 2014 when I was the health chairman in the Senate, and I proposed a bill to move the fuel into a regulated space. Sure. Or above ground. The spills occurred. It did affect the aquifer, and so the Navy's going to have to do a couple things. One, they're going to have to move all the fuel above ground. We now know that they've agreed to do that, so we'll get the final plans by June 30th, and we hope to have it done by November of this year. It could take some time because you're talking about upwards of 150 million gallons of fuel.
Right.
So that's got to be managed, number one. Number two, the contamination of the aquifer has to be fully paid for, so they're going to have to build and drill new wells for us that are safe, not contaminated, and can produce water, not just for the families that live near there, which is critical, but also as we want to build housing across our island here on Oahu, where we have the epicenter of our population. This housing has to be built with access to clean water.
Essential infrastructure.
It is. And so I've already spoken to the leadership in the military. I'm speaking to one of the generals again later this week. I made the immediate demand. I was acting governor at the time when some of this came to light. The immediate demand that they make everyone whole, take care of people's health care costs, and get us this extra water. But I've also extended this conversation to say, if you're going to be a part of our ohana, which the military is, then take on the largest challenge we have, which is affordable housing. And so they know that that's where I'm coming from as lieutenant governor. I think that's the way to a peaceful relationship between the state of Hawaii and the military, which is we say we're one ohana, we then have to act like we're one ohana.
Right.
And if they're going to live here and affect all things, including the cost of housing, that also has to be factored in, calculated into their relationship with us. So that's very important to me, and I think that that's going to be one of the things that I work on in the next few years.
Sure, they have to understand that they have a responsibility. Sometimes they can, that's why I question that. The federal government sometimes can hide behind the federal rules and say, well, this is only our obligation right here, but Hawaii, there's always a give back. If you're going to use these resources, there's a not necessarily quid pro quo, but an expectation that you share in your resources to make it better.
Yes, and the obvious realities also are that they have Pohakuloa, Makua Valley. These are other large pieces of land that are used by the military, but they have to be in contract, in a lease with the state of Hawaii. Mm-hmm. And you only do leases when you're on good terms with people, and so we need to be on good terms with one another.
Right.
That's my real position, which is work out these relationships. It's like any family. Mm-hmm. You can have some bumps in the road.
Right.
And we had a bump in the road that was tragic with Red Hill, but now that we're moving past it and people are getting back to good health and the water is being constantly cleaned and vetted, now we go to the next space in our relationship, and that relationship is going to definitely include a discussion about how big the footprint for the military should be, and what we're doing with these bases.
Sure. Well, along those lines, I think that $400 million for the project for the Aloha Stadium and refurbishment and the build out there, there's some federal dollars there. But, what can you say to the folks that Hawaii is rail is an example?
Yes.
Cost overrun, time overrun. Is there an answer?
There can be answers. There's no question that the previous leadership blew it on the rail, without a doubt, okay? And they went from $5 billion to $12 billion. It's a disaster, right? But there was an example. My team worked with the folks that built the Cancer Center. The Cancer Center, which is quite extraordinary if people haven't been over there near Jabsum, the Cancer Center was built 9 months faster than they thought and $19 million under budget.
Sure.
And it is spectacular. So sometimes we can have successes. The rail is obviously a much more complicated process with a lot of nuance, because you had to buy land around it, you had to deal with all of the corridors for travel.
Major.
Traffic, exactly. However, we can sometimes have successes. What I would say is this: there has to be some patience, but I'm in general an impatient person when it comes to people's tax dollars or just waiting. I don't like to wait. It's the emergency room doctor in me, so I like things to get done. If you have a challenge, go right at it, and that's what we'll do. So I expect we'll see progress on the rail. There's a new administration. They're keen on getting to a conclusion, but look, I'm a sports fan.
Yeah.
I love the stadium, and I love the idea that it's another opportunity for our young people to dream, because I grew up with people that ran some of these stadiums, saw big concerts come in, saw professional sports teams come in, and that's a really neat career to have.
Yeah, and that's a big draw. Another great opportunity for jobs, et cetera, for
sure.
Local Hawaiian folks.
And I think also having an elite sports facility could be good. There are going to be World Cup games in the future, which I'll fight for
sure,
that kind of thing. And so I'd like to see us be a relevant venue for that kind of thing. I mean, obviously, it's unlikely that we're going to attract a professional franchise.
Right.
Although I have had conversations with some of the soccer franchises that are on the mainland, and Hawaii is very well suited to professional soccer. That I intend to, over time, reach out to some of the rugby leagues across the globe and the cricket leagues potentially across the globe. And it would be wonderful if once in a blue moon we got an NFL game over here in Hawaii.
At least a Pro Bowl back,
That would not be bad. And I'll pitch my old friends back in Pittsburgh, and maybe I can get a Steeler game here.
Oh, that's awesome. That's all. You had mentioned you're an emergency room doctor, and and a lot of people do that, and especially to keep your license up, you have to work. And so you're continuing to do that up Kohala side on the Big Island?
Yeah, I'm on call this weekend. I do a 48-hour shift, now just one weekend a month, because over time and with COVID, my job got so busy that even weekends weren't available for me much of the time. But I do value that connectedness to my community.
Sure.
I really grew up as an adult on Big Island, Ka'u and Kona and Kohala. So the people are wonderful up there. They welcome me, and to be able to give back a little bit as a doctor has always been great. I don't know if that will go on forever, because some of the work that I'm considering in the future won't allow for that.
Right.
But I will say this: that medical missions, working with the homeless community, with street medicine, it's very gratifying.
Well, that leads to a great segue into my next question. Hawaii is beautiful, crystal blue ocean, all these, but there's a little bit of urban blight happening. On I think it's King Street and Kalakaua. There's this. It's just like a village pops up, and then you see the garbage truck and the police there every other morning and trying to deal with that. What are some of the things that it sounds like in your experience with that health background and things that this is an important health issue?
It is.
Tell us about that.
Well, I view people who are homeless as, first of all, struggling very with difficult times. I mean, and a lot of individuals who are without a home have PTSD from being on the street. They may very well have advanced mental illness or drug addiction. That happens quite a lot. And then, of course, when people cluster, it becomes a challenge. So there are solutions to this. So my team, as Lieutenant Governor, built 2 kauhale, the word for village, essentially, in Hawaiian. One over in Waimanalo and one in Kalealoa. And there's no trash. They are immaculate. They're tiny houses. People feel a sense of belonging.
Sure.
And just like anything, if you have pride in where you are, you respect your neighbors and you want to keep things clean and healthy and safe and beautiful. What happens, though, is if we don't value the human beings that are out there struggling, then they themselves don't value their own lives, and they end up living in ways where you see torn up trash bags and all kinds of,
It's almost like a third world country. I've been to Somalia myself in the Army, and it's similar. It's sad, and frustrating probably for the city and for everyone.
It's a real tough challenge because there's a lot of wealth inequity, and I'm not just talking about between middle class folks. I'm talking about there's some very wealthy people, which we celebrate people's successes, but then there is a lot of poverty, and that's everywhere. Cities all across the globe are struggling with this, but we can get a hold of it if we're smart. If we set aside the right pieces of land that are near enough to the urban core that people can get resources, get water, that's where people like to live, but also safe spaces where they can retreat to and therefore not be, like you said, a part of the urban blight. That really is the solution. Now, there's a lot of pieces to this puzzle. You have to make sure people have good social workers. You have to make sure that they are not violent. You have to make sure.
But there's also a criminal element that people with mental health issues or people who take advantage of people in those situations. The police are certainly a needed resource, and I know they're having a hard time finding.
Yes. Well, we have to empower the police to arrest people that break any rules or laws. Okay, and at the same time, if it's just that they're struggling with poverty and are stuck on the road and therefore can't find a bathroom, can't deal with their trash, then we get them into small villages or to the H4 facility, which we built, because it's way better to send people into a space that's good for them rather than to the hospital or the prison, which is really expensive. So it's in the interest of society to also kind of address the problem with the right resources. And that's why a lot of times our police are now working with the paramedics or working with nurses, because more often than not, they just as soon get someone into a better health space rather than put them into an incarceration.
Right, and the hospitals sort of become the catch-all for this, and they're overcrowded and different things. So there's lots of different systemic things that there's certainly opportunities.
Well, that's what we saw. With the hospital, the average encounter with a homeless individual, if they had to get taken from their community or their tent to an ambulance to the hospital and get treated, was over $4,000 per person each time.
Right.
And that's why they were costing over 80 grand per person per year. But if instead you give them a tiny home, their costs come down like 70, 80%.
Right.
And that's just a much better way to go about it. Plus someone gets a tiny home. So there are solutions, you just have to have political will.
Yeah, and there's certainly momentum, it appears. And so, now that we've talked a lot about, what you've done as the Lieutenant Governor, and maybe express for us, what, looking back and sort of taking it all in, what has it meant to you?
Well, it's meant the world to me to be able to serve. I mean, it's really a great honor to get to be a Lieutenant Governor and reach out to people. I see thousands and thousands of people. This was an extraordinary period because COVID occurred.
Sure.
And as a physician with COVID, I actually got to make this job meaningful, I think. A lot of times it was difficult for Lieutenant Governors in the past. So for Hawaii, we were able to, though making tough choices, and we're recovering from those choices, we were able to have the lowest mortality rate, second only to Vermont, the lowest transmission rate of COVID of all the states. I mean, that was pretty amazing. And to set up clinics for people and to get people vaccinated if they chose it, and to make sure that we didn't see a lot of our kupuna suffer unnecessarily or needlessly, that was an incredible thing to be a part of. So even if this ends up being my last role in government, it would be just a memory to celebrate forever. And I'm grateful to my staff. My team is just wonderful. Brooke and Fele and Jeremy and Sherry, all these people were amazing partners. But I'll tell you, the battle goes on. We just have scratched the surface of homelessness. We have come through the pandemic, but there will be another at some point. We have to be much more prepared the next time. There's going to be a change in Hawaii's economy, and we should be ready to seize it. You know, so it's a really interesting time to have been Lieutenant Governor.
Sure. Well, again, it's amazing. And 1 year ago, we met in the middle of the pandemic, and it's just been great getting to know you and seeing all the things you've done. Usually at the end of our time, we have a little pauhana round where we talk about it. It's a little fast, answer here. But let's talk about what Josh Green does on a day off, or do you have days off?
I really don't ever take a day off, almost ever. I take a few hours here and there to be with my family, play some games, or cook a meal together. But I don't take days off, not these days, because people are still struggling.
What's a meal that your family likes to cook and enjoy?
We like to cook spaghetti, for sure.
With the French garlic bread and everything, all the things? Okay.
Garlic bread is a fan favorite back at home, and they like my meatballs. Jamie likes to do stir fries. Sammy loves cauliflower. Maya loves sushi and sashimi. So we got a mix at our house.
Well, how about a fave place when your family goes out to eat?
When we go out to eat, let's see. We are going out tonight, and the
birthday.
Yeah, it's a birthday night. I won't mention actually where we're going tonight because it's a super crazy special night.
Yeah,
but,
you don't want to eat.
They like the Spaghetti Factory, actually. The kids do. We like to go out for pizza. Honestly, it's kind of a good thing. And we just have so much going on all the time because with teenagers, and Jamie is an incredible mom who manages their lives, and then this lieutenant governor job and the ER job. We just have to sometimes sneak a few hours together. We got away for Mother's Day to see our cousins, which was great.
Sure. Well, how do your kids adjust to all this busy dad stuff? They roll right with it?
They do. They don't seem to care one way or another, which is pretty neat.
Yeah, that's sort of maybe teenager.
Yeah.
What's Dad doing? I don't know. He's lieutenant governor or something.
Yeah, I come home and it's just not any different for them. I think they've been really good. They adjusted, though we had protesters, which was difficult, I think, on my son, but they rolled with that punch. And we've learned to understand that there are differences of opinion and ideology. And that was a really good lesson for my kids. Not an easy lesson, but a good one.
Yeah, we have to be open and have an open dialogue, and not sort of camp out on our sides, and there's no way to move forward that way.
That's right.
So how far will Hawaii go this year under the new coach, Timmy Chang?
I think it can be a 500 season, maybe a little bit better.
Okay.
I think he's going to do some quarterback development, which is a good thing for him. I've met him. He's terrific, and I'd love to see us get back into bowl games, and I'd like to get him into a new stadium so that we can have all kinds of recruitment.
Sure. Yeah, great. Especially when like you said, an elite athletic facility brings a lot of different resources and opportunities.
It does. We're talking about possibly also enhancing the facility over at the university a little bit, at least for short term. It's going to take a couple years to build the stadium, and that can always be used then for other sports, like I mentioned earlier, soccer, cricket, or rugby. All these things are going to be good for Hawaii.
Sure. And now, how do you keep yourself? I'd ride the number 2 bus. It goes right by King Street, and I think I see a hat on, and you're out walking. Is that? I don't know if it's you or not. How do you get exercise? And you're so busy. How do you? Because that as a leader, it seems like got to stay healthy and keep the stress off. How do you do it?
I walk 8 to 10 miles a day, and I used to run more, but I blew out part of my Achilles tendon one time, so that was a bit of a bummer. Just happens. But yeah, I really do that for stress relief, and it's a good time also really early in the morning, get to call my mom back home. She's getting older, and my dad and all my friends from the day. So it's very refreshing to have quiet time.
Awesome. Josh Green, I'll call you Josh, Doc.
Yes.
It was such a pleasure to meet with you today, and look forward to hearing lots of good things about you in your future, and hopefully we can follow up and talk with you again real soon.
Anytime you need.
All right.
Take
Aloha.
care. You got it.
Make sure to subscribe to Hawaii Boss and follow us on social media at Hawaii Boss Podcast at the links in the description. We'll see you soon in the boss's office.